Hello, good evening, everyone. We are going to begin tonight with Perek Ches, chapter 8 in Sefer Daniel. And finally, we are back to Lashon HaKodesh, back to Hebrew. So we've been working on the first 7 prakim, many of which have been in Aramaic. And tonight, it's going to be a little bit more familiar because it's back to Hebrew. And why is that? So I'm just going to read the first 4 words of the Perek. It begins, Bishnas Shalosh L'Malchus Belshazzar. We're running out of battery on the Zoom. We're going to have to back this up. Are you able to maybe, can you run upstairs to Rabbi Teichman's office? He's there, and ask him for the adapter to his laptop. Okay, I'm just going to wait a minute because we're going to, the Zoom's going to turn off because we're not backed up on battery and the computer's low. What's he doing? He's just getting the plug from Rabbi Teichman, and I'm going to move it so that we can have it plugged in. Rob, I'm just gonna move over here, okay? Yeah, just so we have, so I can be plugged in and the Zoom mode go out. Thank you. I'm just gonna move over here so we can be plugged in. Okay, we're back. All right, so the parak begins, Bishnas Shalosh L'Malchus Belshazzar, in the 3rd year of the king of Belshazzar. Belshazzar was the last of the Babylonian kings. We learned the first few prakim about Nebuchadnezzar, who was the first Babylonian king. The second Babylonian king was Evil Merodach, who's not mentioned anywhere in Sefer Daniel, who was Nebuchadnezzar's child. And then comes Belshazzar, who is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. The last parak we had about Daniel's vision and Mashiach actually happened in the 1st year of Belshazzar's kingdom. We're now, in this parak, is the 3rd year of Belshazzar. So why is this in Hebrew? So the Barbanel says, because those of you who were with us when we learned Parak Hay, we had in Parak Hay was the story about Belshazzar making the party with the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash, and there was a hand which came out right by itself, started writing on the wall. So when we did that story, we said what happened that night. That night, Belshazzar was assassinated, and he died, and that was the end of his kingship. So the Barbanel says this Parak Ches here, talks about the Nevuah, which is occurring in the 3rd year of Belshazzar's reign. So the reason it's in Hebrew is to kind of indicate to us that this is the end of the Aramaic. It's the end of the time because Belshazzar is going to die. His time is up. And this is the transition out of the Babylonian dominion. So the parak begins as follows. Belshazzar HaMelech. Chazon Nira Eli Ani Daniel. I, Daniel, had this vision. So here we go again. Last week we had a vision in which we talked about many of the predictions as to when Mashiach would come. So here we go. We have another vision. And Daniel says, Acharei Hanira Eli Batchila. This vision is after the first vision I had last week. Okay, and this week we're going to have other possible predictions for Mashiach based on another cryptic pasuk here. Va'er'eh pasuk beis. Va'er'eh bechazon. And I saw in a vision. Vayhi bir osi. And it was what I saw. Va'ani b'Shushan habira. I was in the city of Shushan asher be'elam hamedina, which was in the capital. Va'er'eh bechazon. Va'ani hayisi al uval ulai. And Daniel is standing by this river called the Ulai River. Va'esa enai. And he lifts up his eyes. Va'er'eh. And I saw. V'hinei ayel echad omed lifnei ha'uval v'lo karnayim. There was a ram. And this ram is by the river, and the ram has these 2 horns. V'hakranayim gavohos, and they are two very big horns. V'ha'achas gavoh min hashenis, one of them is bigger than the second. V'hagavoh ola ba'achrona, and the larger one is coming up second. So the ram has these two horns on its head, and the first horn that appears is somewhat smaller, then the second one appears is larger. Ra'isi esa'ayil pasuk daled, I saw the ram, minageach yama b'tzafon v'negba, and the ram is like headbutting, it's like goring, in towards the west and towards the north and towards the south. V'chol chayos lo yamdu lefanav, and all of the other animals were not able to withstand and be in the presence of this ram. Ve'ein matzil miyado, nothing could be saved from it. V'asa kirtzano v'higdil, the ram was just doing as it pleased, and it's getting larger and bigger and more grand, and no one can stop it. Pasuk hey, va'ani hayisi maven, and I, Daniel, was looking, I was trying to understand, v'inei, Sefer ha'izim ba min amarav. Now there was a goat that appears out of the west, al pnei chol haaretz, ve'ein nogea ba'aretz. So it's almost like a flying goat. Like the goat is like appearing from the west, but it's not touching the ground. It's like being flown in. The hatzafir, and this goat, keren chazus bein einav, has a very distinct horn between its eyes. Pasuk vav, vayavo ad ha'ayil bal ha'kranayim, and the goat approaches this ram who has the horns. Asher ra'isi omei lifnei huval, vayaratz elav b'chamas kocho, and the goat starts with all its force and might running towards this ram. Ur isiv, and I see, magia eitzel ha'ayil, it approaches the ram. Vayismarmar elav, and it begins to fight with it. Vayachas ha'ayil, and the goat overtakes the ram. Vayishaber shtei kronav, it smashes, it breaks its two horns. And the ram just can't stand its ground anymore. Vayashlicheu arza, the goat throws the ram to the ground. Vayir mesehu, and it tramples it. And the ram doesn't stand a chance. Yeah, knockout, exactly. Now the goat gets very big. We're going to do two more psukim and then kind of take a look at the first 9 together. This goat begins to get very large. From the it means like etzem, like it gets very, very strong. When it gets really strong, nishbara hakeren hagadola. It has a large horn, and that horn breaks off. Vata'alena chazus arba tachteha, and in its place 4 other distinct horns come up. La arba ruchos hashemayim, in the 4 directions of the skies. Pasuk test 9. Umin ha'achas mehem yatsa keren achas mitziira, and from those 4 pops up a small horn. Vatigdal yeser, and it begins to become more powerful and great. El HaNegev, towards the south, El HaMizrach, El HaTzevi, towards the east, and towards the Tzevi, which is the chosen land, meaning Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so let's go back here for a second. There's one thing to notice here, and a lot of what I'm going to say tonight is really based straight off the Malbim, running through the parak here. So the Malbim basically says what's going on here is our parak is a continuation of last week. If you remember last week, we had these very odd type of animals, right? There was Daniel sees his vision, and there's this like lion that has the eagle's horns, and is a bear, and there was this leopard with 4 heads and wings on it, and then this other beast which is undescribed. And if you contrast that to this parak, you'll notice that we are presented with 2 animals which in general are termed, normally we would call them behemoths, right? They're behemoth. They're domesticated animals. They're more peaceful, not as wild, not as threatening. They are a goat and a ram. So what is going on? So the Malbim says basically, this is a continuation of last week, in the sense that last week, if you remember, Daniel was very focused on this 4th beast, this like wild beast that there was. And he tried to understand the 4th beast, and he was given this information that indicated maybe when the beast would end, the Mashiach would come. So the Malbim says he never got any information on beast number 2 and number 3. We explained that beast number 2, the bear, represented Persia and Media, and beast number 3, the leopard, represented Alexander the Great, but he wasn't told any of this. So he now has a vision about 2 animals which are to represent Persia and Greece. Now, why are they being represented by more peaceful animals? So the Malbim says, just historically, he says, overall, Persia and Greece overall were more pleasant and more civilized in terms of how they treated, in terms of their relationship with the Jews. So the Malbim says, last week's parak, we've got these 4 crazy animals and things, and those represent those nations in terms of how they interacted with the world. And now in this week, we have these 2 nations, Persia and Greece, in terms of how they interact with the Jews. The Malbim says Persia overall was pretty tolerant of the Jews. And in terms of Greece, he says, really, until Antiochus came along in the Hanukkah story. Until the Hanukkah story, the Malbim says, right, Alexander the Great, there's a famous Gemara, it says Alexander the Great had this dream about Shimon HaTzadik, right? And when he saw Shimon HaTzadik, right, he said, oh, I had this dream about this great person, and he looks like an angel, and right, he bows down to him. So he said, they basically were pretty tolerant and acceptable of the Jews. And it wasn't until Antiochus came along with the Hanukkah story that things kind of got out of hand. So that's what's being represented by these two animals. So now let's go through without reading the psukim again, but just see how that falls out. Okay. So animal number 1 is this ram, right? The ram has how many horns on it? The ram has 2 horns. Okay, the ram has 2 horns. So who are the 2 horns? So the 2 horns are what we know as Persia and Media, Paras, Umadai, right? And the 2 horns, it says what happens, there are these 2 horns, and the second one is greater than the first. Because what happens, we're going to learn, after the fall of Bavel, after Belshazzar dies, what happens? Media takes over, right? Daryavesh Mada, that was the parak we learned. He was the one who threw Daniel in the lion's den. So Media takes over for 1 year, and they're off the scene. And after that, Persia takes over, and they're greater. So that's the second horn that's greater. Okay. It says the ram is going towards the west and towards the north and towards the south. So what is that referring to? So these are referring to all the different directions that Persia is conquering. Okay. What happens? After the ram comes the goat. And the goat comes from the west. So who is the goat? The goat is Alexander the Great coming from the west to conquer Persia. And it says, Ein nogea ba'aretz, it's not walking on the ground. So the idea is it's coming very swiftly, right? And what happened? It defeats the ram. And it says the goat begins to get very, very strong until what happens in Pasuk Ches? What happens to the horn on the goat? Pasuk Ches, it just breaks on its own. So what does it mean it breaks on its own? So the Malbim and all the Mefarshim say the horn is Alexander the Great. What happened, right? He just mysteriously died, right? He just died. That was it, right? There was no, right? So Nishbra just broke. So that was Alexander the Great, gone. And what comes up in its place? We had this last week. Vata'alena chazus arba tachteha. The 4 kingships that come out of Alexander the Great. And the Malbim lists them here, right? He lists them in Pasuk Ches. He says, I said in last week, I'm not so, such an expert in the history part of it, but he says this is someone named Ptolemy who took over the part of Egypt, which was Alexander the Great's kingdom. Number 2, a person named Seleucid, and Seleucid took over the Asia area.
God doesn't allude to this, right?
That's a good question. I do not know. I've never heard that shot in Chad Gadya. Rob's asking if Chad Gadya alludes to any of this because of different animals. It's very possible that someone says that's an explanation. I never heard that though. The third one is Antiochus, not Antiochus in the Hanukkah story, but a different Antiochus who takes over after Alexander the Great. And the fourth one is Philip, who is Alexander the Great's brother, who then takes over Greece. So these are the 4 horns that come up after that. Okay, let's take a look at Pasuk Tes. So now what happens? Persia and Media are off the scene. Again, we're predicting this. And now who comes on the scene? Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great dies. There are these 4 kingdoms that come under him. Umin ha'achas mehem yatsa keren achas mitzeira. There's a very small horn. Vatigdal yeser, and the small horn starts to get greater, and it starts to conquer towards the south and towards the east and towards Tzivi. Eretz HaTzivi is known as Eretz Yisrael. So what is this small horn exactly? So here we have a split. The Malbim says that this is referring to the next line of Greece. Continuing, And this is where things go bad for the Jews, which is Antiochus, the Hanukkah story. Rashi says that this is not talking about that. It's talking about when Greece is over and we're moving into the time of Rome. And this small horn is Titus. Okay. So what happens to the small horn? Picking up in Pasuk Yud. Okay, Pasuk Yud, Pasuk 10. What happens to the small horn? Vatigdal ad tzavo hashemayim. It gets greater until heaven, meaning it's beginning to, so to speak, wage war on heaven. Vatapel arza min hatzava umin hakochavim. And it knocks down to the ground from the great things that are in heaven and the stars, which the Mefarshim say is supposed to allude to the Jews. Vatir Meseim, and it tramples them and it destroys them. Okay, so again, Rashi says this is referring to Titus from Rome, right? The Gemara says, famous Gemara, that he went and stabbed the Kodesh Kodashim. He said, I'm waging war against Hashem. So that's an allusion to this. The Malbim says this is talking about Antiochus in the Hanukkah story. Pasuk Yud Aleph. Va'ad sar hatzava higdil. And this horn keeps going up towards heaven. Umimenu huram hatamid. And from it, the carbon tamid was removed and stopped being offered. V'hushlach mechon mikdasho. And the foundation of the Beis HaMikdash was thrown down. Okay. Then what happened? V'tzava tinasein al hatamid befasha. There was a certain amount of time, tinasein al hatamid, that Hashem allowed that the carbon tamid was going to be inoperative, bifasha, and that was because of the Jewish people's averos. V'tashlech emes arza, and this enemy threw truth down to the ground. What is truth? So emes is always right. The truth is the Torah, right? So the Torah is referred to as truth. So the idea is it's like fighting against the Torah, which again is either at this point everyone assumes this is Rome and Titus fighting against the Torah to bring the Jews down. And indeed it was successful at doing this. Okay. Pasuk Yud Gimel. So at this point, now we have the animals down and what Daniel sees. And now Daniel hears something. And he hears some kind of voice. Vayomer echad kadosh la palmoni hamedaber. So he hears one malach talking. And while he hears a malach talking, he hears another echad kadosh, one other holy thing, saying the following thing. Ad masai hechazon hatamid. Until when is this vision of the carbon tamid that we see, that the carbon stopped and they took over the Beis HaMikdash? How long is that going to last for? V'hapesha shomein. And they put in its place something which was shomein. What's the word I'm looking for? They can't do anything. Hapesha shomein. It's like it's like completely quiet. It's inoperative, right? The Mefarshim say this is talking about when they put the idol in the Beis HaMikdash. But Hapesha shomein, right? They stuck something which was not. What do you say? A mute abomination. That's like mute. Shomeim is they say mishruta, like shosek, that it's quiet, but it means meaning it can't do anything. They stuck an idol in the Beis HaMikdash. The Kodesh v'tzava mirmas, and the holy ones mirmas are trampled. So how long? How long is this going to happen? That the Romans came and they they stopped offering the carbon tamid. The avoda stopped in the Beis HaMikdash, and they waged war against the Jews and they took over them. How long will that go until? So Pasuk Yudalid, Vayomer Eli, and this voice told Daniel, and here's the key words, Ad Erev Boker. Erev Boker is until evening and morning. Alpayim Ushlosh Meos. Alpayim is 2,000, Shlosh Meos is 300, V'nitzdak Kodesh. And then the holy ones will be, redeemed or victorious. So this is understood again by many to be some kind of prediction. How long is this going to last for? They came in and they stopped the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash and they took over the Jews. How long? Ad Masai. How long will it last for? Pasuk Yudalid. It will last for Erev Boker until an evening and a morning. 2,300 years. So last week we had our cryptic pasuk that we were dealing with, right? Last week they told Daniel. Daniel said, "How long is this fourth beast going to last for?" Until a time, and 2 times, and a time and a half, right? A time, times, and a half a time. And we had 4 different explanations, right? We had Rav Saad Yagon and Rashi gave an explanation. They figured out how much time that was, and they said Mashiach was going to come in 1403 in the 1300s, and then you had the Barbanel. They said the 1400s. The Barbanel said the 1500s. The Malbim had a year in the 1900s.
We're in 5781.
Yes.
And 2020. I mean, nothing with the guys here, right? Because 2300, if you add,
Yeah.
you subtract, it's like another 280 years. So if you add that.
No, if you're going to follow the secular calendar, we're in 2021. We've got another 280 years till we get to 2300.
Oh, 280.
Oh, okay, good. So what Rob and Ari bring up. Okay, so the question is, this 2300. When are we counting this 2300 from? Right, meaning that it's very unclear. Right, it's before the second Beis Hamikdash. Right, it says this nevuah is happening before the second Beis Hamikdash. But what's the nevuah about? The nevuah says there's going to be this thing called Titus, right? The Roman emperor, the Roman general is going to come in and he's going to take over, and the carbon tummy is going to stop. And how long is that going to last? 2,300 years. So we have a few different calculations here. Now, remember, those of you who were with us last week, I apologize, I didn't bring all the Marmakomas, our chart from last week. But whatever year you come up with last week, right? Meaning the Mefarshim are all going to try to make these 2 years work, right? Last week we had the famous sentence in Perek Zion is the 4th beast is going to reign until a time and times and half a time. And now here we have that the carbon tumid is going to be batel for 2,300 years, a morning and evening in 2,300 years. Okay. No, thank you. It doesn't. Okay, excellent. So let's start with the most simple one, most straightforward, which is the Ibn Ezra and the Rasad Yagon. So Ari Braun was machavin to Ibn Ezra and Rasad Yagon. They say, it doesn't say years. He points it out. Ibn Ezra says it does not say the word Shana. It says it's going to happen for 2,300. So he says, Ibn Ezra says, folks, relax. This is not talking about Mashiach. He says this whole thing is not talking about Mashiach. We're talking about Greece. And we never even got into Rome. We're not talking about that, Ibn Ezra says. It's talking about Greece, Alexander the Great, and then the 4 kingdoms that come out of him. And then there's this one small horn, which is Antiochus. And then what does Antiochus do? Antiochus with the whole Hanukkah thing, and right? So he says 2,300, Ibn Ezra says, is, Ibn Ezra says this on Pasuk, Chaf Hey, it's at the end of the parak. He says it's 2,300 days. So what's 2,300 days? So it's roughly 6. He comes out with it's 6 years and 3 or 4 months. Okay?
So that's how long they had the Beis Hamikdash until retaken?
So the Ibn Ezra says that, he says that the Tsar B'nai Yisrael was in during the times of Antiochus. How long did that last? It was around 6 and some years. And that's all he says, nothing to do with Mashiach. It's not a Mashiach issue here. This is just how long was it going to be until the Hashmonaim took over and regained control. Okay, that's what Ibn Ezra says. The other Mefarshim all seem to understand that 2,300 is talking about years, and it's talking about a prediction after the 4th empire, which is Rome. And therefore they say, what? And some of them say that basically they say there's no indication anywhere that lasted 6 years. Apparently, I'm not so up on the history, but apparently some people asked Ibn Ezra, said there's no indication of that. He said, yeah, well, here's the indication. It says 2,300, and must be days. It's that. Okay, fine. So I'll share 3 approaches with you. One is Rashi. So Rashi here in Pasuk Yudal says the following thing. Rashi says the 2,300 is years, and it's 2,300 years from the Galus of Mitzrayim. How long is this issue going to last? It's going to last until an evening and a morning and 2,300. From when? Not from now, but from Galus Mitzrayim. So Rashi does the math, and he begins, right? He says, okay, well, when was Galus Mitzrayim? So we know Bnei Yisrael got out of Mitzrayim in the Hebrew year, 2448. Okay, and they were in Mitzrayim for 210 years. So I'm just doing a calculation here. So we go into Mitzrayim in the year 2238, right? 2238 is when we go into Mitzrayim. Okay, Now, so 2238 plus 2300, right? That's 2300 equals 4,538. Okay, good. Right. Okay, good. Now, Rashi says, what's the deal with the morning and the evening? So Rashi says, Erev Uboker, you take the gematria of Erev Uboker. This is a little creative. I don't know where, okay. And what's the gematria of Erev Uboker? Okay, the gematria of Erev Uboker together is 574. So he says, you're taking 2,300 years plus Erev. It's Erev Boker. What's Erev Boker? It must mean a cryptic allusion to how many years it is. So it's 574 years plus 2,300 years. And all of this is occurring from the time of 2238, which is the time they went into Mitzrayim. So where does that bring us to? 5,112 years. Year 5,112. Now Rashi adds one thing here, which we're not going to see till the end of the Navi in Perikei Beis. So just take my word for it for now. It's not worth getting into, but Rashi says there's another allusion to some 45 years, that like Mashiach will come after a 45-year something. So he adds on 45 years.
Is that around the Christopher Columbus time?
Well, I'll say so. So let's see. So if you add up all these numbers, we end up with the year 5,157. 5,157. Okay, in Hebrew years. Where is that going to put us in? 600 some years ago. Very good. 600 some years ago, right? Which very good. So it's a little before because it ends up in the English years 1397. 1397. Now, it's interesting. If you remember last week, we did our Rashi calculation, and based off of that, Rashi ended up at 1403 English year. Now it's at 1397. So it's a 6-year discrepancy. So last week I was calculating the numbers. It was a different set of numbers. We were calculating from the time of the Beis Hamikdash being destroyed. Here Rashi explicitly says that we should take off. He says, sorry, I apologize. It comes out to 1397 here. Last week we did a calculation and we were assuming from the time the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. If you minus 6 years, because the carbon tamid stopped being brought 6 years before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and you take last week's number we got for Rashi, and this number, 1403 minus 6, is 1397. They both end up at 1397. Again, I should have made a sheet, but we have it's a different phrase in each parak, but Rashi comes out at the same year. The same year is 1397. That's a good question, right? Ari's asking, why are we subtracting those 6 years? There was no carbon tamid also between the first and the second bias. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's a little cryptic here. I'm kind of like, I don't really have any input in it. I'm kind of just trying to do the math and follow them along. Okay, so the Abarbanel comes along, and remember, the Abarbanel lived in the 1400s. So he knew this Rashi. He said, oh, well, 1397 came and went, no Mashiach. So the Barbanel rolled up his sleeves. He said, okay. So he said like this. He said, very simple. He said, we're going to take 2,300 years from when? So he said, 2,300 years is from the time that things went south in Israel. When did things go south? Well, they had a Beis Hamikdash. Everything was wonderful. Okay, fine. That's Rabbi Katz's whole theory about with Yeshua and everything. That's true. No, he's saying in Israel itself. Right, that's Rabbi Katz's whole, right? The worst thing is because they didn't send out the guy. Okay, fine. But barring that, putting that aside. So Barbanel says, if you start when they had a Beis Hamikdash, okay, it was pretty decent. And as soon as Shlomo Melech dies and the kingdom splits, that's bad news. Now, when does that happen, that Barbanel says? He says that's 36 years after the building of the Beis Hamikdash. If you take 2,300 years from that date, from 36 years after they built the Beis Hamikdash, if you take 2,300 years from that date, you come to the year 5,264, which is the English year 1504. Last week, with that Barbanel's calculation, we ended up at 1503. Well, so what was going on? This was 12 years, right, after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, which the Barbanel himself lived through. So many people say, he's living through this like terrible Gehenna time, and he's being thrown from country to country, and he's like saying, 12 years, it's going to happen. So it's interesting. Again, The Barbanel also. Last week we had a time and times and half a time, and he does a whole calculation as to what those refer to. We're not going to repeat, but he ends up at 1503. This week with the 2300 ends up at 1504. Okay, because it all just depends from when you're counting from. It has to be some logical reason why you're counting from them. So you say, oh, I guess I'll say, we're going to count from the time of the split up of the kingdom, because that's the point where everything goes south. Now you have the Malbim. So last week, if you remember, the Malbim lived in the 1800s, late 1800s. So the Malbim said, Rashi predicted it at the end of the 1300s or early 1400s. And the Barbanel came along and said 1500s. And then we even had the Ramban last week, right? We also had the Ramban, which was Ramban ended up at the same time as Rashi, but had a different way of arriving at it, but he had the same goal. So the Malbim said, well, here I am, 1800s, nothing happened. So the Malbim says, very simple. Malbim says, when should we count the 2300 years from? What would be the most logical thing? Okay, it could be from the Beis HaMikdash destroyed. Daniel is being told 2300 years. So if not from the Beis HaMikdash, from the moment that Daniel is being told 2300 years. So the Malbim says, when did he have this nevuah? It says the third year of Belshazzar's reign. So what year was that? So the Hebrew year for that is, he says it explicitly, in Pasuk Yudal, the Malbim says 3388 in Hebrew years. 3388 is when Belshazzar was in his third year. Plus 2300 years equals
4688.
56, someone said? Yeah, 5688. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Right, 3388 plus the 2300. The Malbim says yields 5,688. So when is that? So that is the year 1928, which again, the Malbim's living in the late 1800s. And this again, if you remember last week, the way the Malbim worked out his time and times and half a time also came out right around to 1927, 1928. So they all come to the same conclusion. But again, these are the two, there's going to be one more in a few weeks, stay tuned. But these are the three cryptic lines, right? A time, times, and half a time, and evening and a morning, and 2300. Now, notice many of them, Rashi's the only one who says Erev and Boker means some kind of time period. They all just say, no, Erev Boker is not amount of time. Forget the gematria thing. It's 2300. What's Erev and Boker? They say, Erev is like this is a classical part, right? We always say Erev is night, right? Right? We have Amunah and Hashem at night. What's nighttime? We always say nighttime is the time of the Gullus, right? So Ad, Erev, there will be evening, it will be dark, it will be a Gullus. Boker, then the sun will rise. And it will be a time for new. And that will happen when? At the end of this 2300 somethings.
Like in a somewhat near future. They never actually trying to really dig into it. They're just saying it's going to be soon. That seems kind of obvious for
Yeah, interesting, yes. Right. Well, he lived in the late 1800s. That's right. He lived in the late 1800s. So he's got to already start pinning it ahead. Everyone's right. And we had with the Rambam as well, right? The Rambam pinned it at the year, I think 1212. We said last week, based on a pasuk by Bilam. So I'll give you one more possibility that I heard, not by any of the classical mefarshim. But another 2300 that someone suggested is, they said, could be 2300 of total years of Gullus. No. Of total Gullus. So what do we have, right? So we basically you have the 70 years of Gullus Bava. And then we have basically from the year 68 or 70 until now, right? Well, let's do the math, right? We're in 2021 minus either 70 or 68 years. It's not clear whether that question when the Korban happened. Let's call it 70. That's 1,951 years, plus another 70 years. That's going to put you at 2021. So 2,300 would mean another 180 years, right? Sorry, 280 years, right? If you take 70 years of the Gullus Bava and 1,951 years of our current Gullus, right? That brings you to 2,021 years. Happens to be our secular year, 2021, right? 2,021 years. So to get to 2,300, right? 2,300 total galus years would be another 279 years. Okay, so, I don't know. Again, back to what we said last week, about all these times maybe potentially being turning points and so on and so forth. But that's what we have here. So let's see. Okay, now this is what's kind of cool. The end of the parak I think is fascinating for the following reason. Until now, we've had all these dreams, right? Parak Beis, right? Nebuchadnezzar had a dream with the statues and the four different, and what happens? Daniel says to him, there's going to be a kingdom, and then this kingdom, and we say what it represents. Notice one thing is missing from all of the Sefer so far. In the text, it never pins down names of countries and empires. Right? It's all right. And then Daniel has a dream about the lion, and then this, and the Mefarshim said that represents that. It doesn't say that in the text. So this is very cool because this was written in the middle of the first in the second Beis Hamikdash. So pasuk Tezvav, Vayihibra Osiani Daniel Sechazon. I saw this vision, Va'avak Shabina, and I wanted to understand it. V'hinei omi lenegdi kamari gever. There was this like human being form in front of me. So the Mefarshim say Gever. What is this Mari Gever? It is Gavriel, right? It's going to say in a moment, actually. Va'eshma kol adam beinu lai, and I heard some kind of voice by the river. Vayikra vayomar, and it called out and it said, Gavriel, havein lahalaz, make it understandable to this person, es hamara, what he saw. Pasuk Yizayin, vayavo etzelemdi, and he came to me, uvivo'o, and when the malach Gavriel came to me, nivati, I was shocked. I fell on my face. Vayomer elai, and he said, havein ben adam, understand. Ki la'es kates hechazon. Chazon, the vision, la'es kates is for a time in the end. It's like a time at the end. Ubedabro imi nirdamti al panai artza. I fell down. Vayigavi, and he touched me. Vayamadin, he tried to pick me up. Vayomer, and he said, Hineni modi'acha. I'm going to tell you. Pasuk yotes es asher yiyeh ba'achris hazon. What will happen at the end of this zon, this like difficult time? Ki lemoed kates, because at some appointed time, kates, there will be an end to this. And now he tells him in the Navi, it says in the Sefer, Ha'ayil asher Isa, the ram, Baal hakronayim, which had the horns, Malche Madai Ufaras. That is Madai Upersha, which again, at this point, Belshazzar was still in charge. V'hat Safir, Pasuk 21, Chavalov, the goat, Melech Yavan, that's the king of Greece. Doesn't say a name, the king of Greece. V'hakeren hagadola asher bein einav, and the large horn that's in its eye, between its eyes, hu hamelech harishon. That's going to be the first king, right? That was Alexander the Great. V'hanish beres, and when it's broken, v'tamodna arba tachtel, 4 came in its place. Arba malchuyos migoya amodna, 4 malchuyos will arise, v'lo bikocho, but not from his power. Uva'acharis malchusan, and in the end of their malchus, kehasem haposhim, when the sinners are finished. I don't exactly know what that refers to. Ya'amod melech az panim, a very stubborn melech is going to get up. Umevin chidos, who will understand, literally means will understand riddles, is like clever. Now, again, Rashi says this is referring to, this is not clear whether this is Antiochus, or according to Rashi, this is Titus, but okay. V'atzam kocho, and he will become very powerful. V'lo bikocho, but not with his power. What does it mean he will become powerful, but not with power? So the Malbim says his power will come, but not from physical might and force, but rather something else. What will it be? So the Malbim says they will be very clever and have the power with their pet in order to try to draw us in and to overtake us that way, but not with physical fighting. V'niflaos yashchis. And the Malbim says this means he will destroy niflaos. What is the wondrous things? The Torah, right? He will destroy the wondrous things. V'tzliach v'asa, and he'll do it and be successful. V'hishchis atzumim, and will destroy the powerful ones, v'am kedoshim, and the holy ones. Va'al sichlo, and through his knowledge, v'tzliach mirma, and successful being cunning and deceit, biyado in his hand, uvilvavo yagdil, and in his heart, he will feel like he is grand and great. Uveshalva yashchis rabim, and in a peaceful way, he will succeed in destroying many. Ve'al sar sarim, and over the officer of officers, meaning Hashem, Ya'amod, he will try to go up against him. Uve'efes yad yishaver, and he'll be broken without a hand. What does it mean he'll be broken without a hand? So Rashi says, who are we talking about? We're talking about Titus. So the Gemara in Gittin says, famous story, right? It says about Titus. It says that the gnat flew up his nose, right? And it became started eating at his brain, and it became, right? So the Gemara says this whole thing and says he died from that. So Rashi says that's an allusion to here. It says he'll become so powerful, but with the efes yad, without a hand, he'll break. Meaning he won't die in war. Pasuk Chavav, Umari ha'er v'aboka asher nemar emesu. And what you saw, Daniel, of this darkness and this morning, it's emes, it's true, it will happen. Ve'ata, and you, and here's the key, sisom hechazon, which means to seal the vision, meaning don't let out the secret. Ki liyamim rabim, because it's not going to happen for a while. The Malbim says, meaning don't tell them really what's going on, because if they really know, it's like we said last week, if they know how long it's going to take, they're just going to give up. So make this unclear. Now, many say then, what's going on? Here we have the whole Sefer, and he's telling us all these stuff, and they tell him to make it unclear. So presumably what's going on is that Daniel had more information than we were given here, right? And you see that what we have is not so clear. He gives us these numbers, 2,300. No one, everyone's trying to figure out what 2,300 means, right? A time and times and half a time. And no one knows when he's counting from. No one knows what the time is referring to. So presumably he had more information and some more clarity than we have here. And he was told, Sisom hechazon, right here, which is to make that covered and not let people know the full picture. Concluding, Pasuk Vani Daniel and I Daniel niyesi v'nechlesi yamim. I was feeling like sick for days. Va'akum, and I got up. Va'e'ese es meleches hamelech, to do the work of the king. Now, what is the work of the king? So the Malbim says here, he got up to do the work of the king. Who's the king at this time? It is Belshazzar. And what happens in the third year of Belshazzar's reign? It is the handwriting on the wall. So the Malbim says this meshes right with that story. It says, I got up to do the work of the king. The Malbim says, they called me in after I had this whole vision. Now it's like we're getting more information about that story, right? He's called in with the writing on the wall. The Malbim says, this happened right before that. He's called in. He's like all, kind of shooken up. And he's called in to figure that out. And I was just like totally, confounded about what I saw. And I did not understand it. And that is the close to that. Next week, we're going to begin with a tefillah of Daniel to Hashem, which takes place now already in the after Babel. So Babel is behind us, and now we're moving into Madai and Parsi. Any questions, comments? Yeah. Okay. Have a wonderful Shabbos.